Morning and welcome to the United Stands. I'm Mark Goldbridge. He's got a smile on his face. Positivity Street. Man United won last night. Lots to get involved in on the show this morning. We'll be talking about sell them all. Wayne Rooney with a major statement after the game yesterday. Do you agree with it? We've had an early super chat from Thomas Hayes who says, hard to disagree with Rooney's analysis of the squad last night. His comments about Rashford were particularly interesting considering he's someone he played with. We'll talk about that. Some very strong words from Wayne Rooney, but they probably fit in with a lot of what you have been talking about anyway. He says sell them all apart from one player. We'll get into that in a moment. Erik ten Hag's speech after the game, does that suggest to you that he's staying? Well, it looks like Thomas Tuchel could be staying at Bayern Munich. Should Man United be swerving that anyway? The fact that he's talking about staying at Bayern doesn't really show what we need at Man United, which is somebody that's desperate to be here. We need a project. We need someone who wants to rebuild this football club. We've already got a guy who's doing it. Maybe we should stick with him as well. I also want to talk about the situation last night with Marcus Rashford. I've seen the video. I saw it last night, but I hadn't heard the audio. Bit of stick for Rashford in the warm-up, which he reacted to. What are your thoughts on that? I think there's multiple layers to it, which we can discuss as well. Also want to talk about the Ahmad evolution and what that means for him and other players and the future for Manchester United. Lots to get involved in this morning. And also a potential midfielder that could be joining Man United. He's not already here. We can talk about Amrabat as well. But look, let's fly straight into what Wayne Rooney had to say after the game yesterday. Obviously, at the weekend, he was saying, like Roy Keane is now saying, like Gary Neville is now saying, there's been a real change in the ex-Man United player community. Maybe they've had a little chat. Maybe they've realised that the majority of the fans actually don't want to see a manager sacked, and maybe they've started to tailor their opinion to what fans want. I don't know. Maybe they've heard something. We just don't know. But Rooney at the weekend did say that he would stick with Ten Hag, and this is what he's had to say about, well, a very brutal verdict on Man United's squad. This is what he had to say. You have to build the team around Bruno Fernandes. He's quality and he's got the fight in him. And I think all the other players, get rid of them. Interesting words from Wayne Rooney after a Manchester United win. Basically, Bruno Fernandes has to be the player that stays. Everyone else needs to go. He says, I think there needs to be a massive clear out. Has to be. It's not going to be in 1 year, but I think it's going to be in the next couple of years. He said, for me, Dalot's done well. Maguire has had an in and out season. But to compete in this league, you need better players. Don't get me wrong, these players are good players, but to compete with Man City, Liverpool and Arsenal, they need better players. And on Rashford, he says, we all know Marcus has the capabilities to play at the top level, and we haven't seen it. I just wonder if it's time for Marcus to go and play somewhere else. I think he has to ask himself that question. I want him to stay and break records at this club. He needs to work hard and get his head down. And he said that for me, personally, the gap won't be closed in the next couple of years. If you look at the gap now between Man United and Man City, that tells you everything. There's no way they close that gap within 2 years. Man City will look to kick on again next year. It's going to take time. That's a building process, and it could take 4 or 5 years. I mean, look, I'm tempted to say Wayne Rooney's been watching the United Stand because you lot have been talking about this for bloody ages. So I don't feel like we all need to get down on our hands and knees and praise Wayne Rooney, our all-time top goal scorer, who's suddenly talking massive sense, because you have been talking about this for years. But it's very refreshing because we're a community and we do this. The mainstream is blinkered. It's blindfolded. It's agenda driven. So when you get somebody in the mainstream, when predominantly we're fed shit, talking sense, you do sort of go, at last, somebody is saying what we're talking about, because it's not rocket science. You hear it on the terrace, you hear it in the pub, you hear it at your school, you hear it at work, you hear it on here. Everybody's been talking about a massive clear out for years. Everybody's been saying that apart from the younger players coming through, you just need to get rid of them. And what I really liked about what Rooney said was 3 things. 1, we do need to sell them all. 2, people like Dalot and Maguire are good players and they're liked. But what he's saying is they are good players, but they're not going to keep Liverpool and Man City and Arsenal awake at night. And on Rashford, look, we'd all like him to do well, but it really does look like he just needs to move. And I think when Wayne Rooney says something like that, our all-time goal scorer, a legend of the club, it resonates because You can't get the bullshit you get online about it's just online fans. It's online fans. You know, what you get from Pratthurst and what you get from, these bloody bots, Twitter accounts who, just blame it on the online fans. It's actually coming in from a legend of the club who's recently played for the club. He's played with some of these players. He knows what the cultures are like. And I think he's absolutely nailed it. I really do. Liam says Mark understands Delo isn't good enough. Big up, Mark. No, I'm not acknowledging that, because Rooney also went on to say that you're not going to do this in one summer. So we're not going to sell Delo and Maguire and Rashford this summer. But what he's saying is, I would clear everybody out apart from Bruno Fernandes and work with the young players and bring other players in on a project. That's what he's saying. Wayne Rooney is basically saying what you're saying, what I'm saying. We won't solve this summer, and we won't solve it next summer. You still need to buy 6 or 7 players this summer, and you still need to sell 10 or 12 players, but you won't solve it that. 12 players out, 7 players in won't make us title winners. You need to do it again next summer. You need to bring 14 to 15 players in, and you need to sell 15 to 20 players over the next 2 or 3 years, and then be progressing over that time, bringing more younger players through. I mean, Rasmus, Garnacho, Ahmad, Mainu will be better next year, but they won't be anywhere near finished articles. I mean, Rasmus is only just 21, Mainu's only just 19, Garnacho's 19, Ahmad's only just breaking into the team. So, good question. Mehdi says, what about Luke Shaw? Luke Shaw, Harry Maguire, Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Mason Greenwood, Donny van der Beek, Eriksen, Varane, Maguire, Lindelof, Casemiro, the list goes on and on, Wan-Bissaka. These players just need to be moved out. For various reasons, they need to be moved out over the next 2 years, and better players need to be brought in. And hallelujah that they're starting to realise it in the mainstream, because normally, Rooney's been a breath of fresh air, because normally it wouldn't get said. Because it's the refreshing thing about Rooney is what he's been saying about Rashford, what he said about Maguire. You wouldn't normally get that because they're English players, and we normally get the English bias. I mean, I think Wayne Rooney is actually part of the same agency that Harry Maguire's part of. And in the past, I've detected that he's been very pro-Maguire, even when Maguire was playing badly. Last night, he sits on Sky and says, look, Maguire's a good player, but I'd move him on. They need better than that. That's just exactly what we're talking about. It's exactly what needs to be said. So look, I think it's what he's basically saying is the only senior player he would keep is Bruno Fernandes, and work with the Garnachos, the Rasmuses, the Mainus, the Ahmads, and everyone else should be moved out. Every other senior player should be moved out over the next 2 years. And I don't disagree with it. I don't disagree with it. They won't all go. Like, I don't think they'll all go. I'd be very surprised if Rashford goes. I'd be very surprised if Delo goes. But over the next 2 years, obviously not this summer. But he's not wrong. We want to be Man City. We want to be Arsenal. We want to compete for the title. You're not going to do that with a lot of these players. No matter how hard they work, it won't happen. Scott McTominay is not good enough. Donny van der Beek is not good enough. Eriksen is not good enough anymore. Wan-Bissaka is not good enough for that. And some people struggle with those words, but the target is Man City. Is Pep Guardiola, Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne sat there going, oh my God, they're keeping Wan-Bissaka and McTominay. We're in big trouble here. And that's the thing. It's breaking through that barrier, and that's what Rooney was talking about last night. I think some people just say, get rid of them, and it's like a toxic reaction to a toxic situation. But it's a logical breakdown of why you get rid of them. And we need to have this conversation. We do. We need to remove some of these players, whether you like them or not, because they're not good enough. We want to be Man City. They've just won a treble last year. They're going to win another Premier League. It's 4 in a row. It's 6 in 7. You can't just go, oh, keep him. He's a good lad. Yeah, he gets himself fit when others are injured. He puts a shift in. I don't see a Man City player who's in that team because they put a shift in. They do put a shift in, but they're high-level players, and that's what Man United do need to bring in. Valencia on the beat, thanks for your gifted membership. Tushar says, Delo, Garnacho, Mainu, Højlund are the only players I'll keep for the next season. Everyone else must be sold, says Tushar. Thomas says, strange you didn't mention Martinez. Well, look, I've got my Martinez hoodie on. We ship them worldwide if you want to get one. But, yeah, look, the Martinez one, for me, I don't think Rooney missed him out because he doesn't think we can build with Martinez. I think the reason he missed Martinez out is because he forgot about Martinez. I don't think it's anything to do with Martinez not being part of that. And Martinez is still pretty young. He's still like mid-20s compared to everybody else. So I don't look, maybe Rooney would get rid of Martinez. I don't know, but I don't actually think personally. I didn't even mention Martinez, did I? Because I feel that he's just not been around for a year that we sort of forget him. He didn't mention Mason Mount either. Is Mason Mount part of that? Is Onana part of that? So Delo, Garnacho, Mainu, Højlund are the only players I'll keep for next season. Everyone else must be sold, says Tusha. It's amazing that Rashford has 400 appearances for United and we still have a question mark over if he's good enough or not, says Patrick. Because he's a light switch player, Patrick. When he's on it, he's a good enough player for Man United. When he's off it, he's not. Rosie says, good morning, Mark. Mods and all. Brilliant game last night. Bruno, Amrabat and the youth were brilliant last night. Hope you're well, says Rosie. Really sad seeing Varane and Martial go. Really good servants for the club, says Ghost Hunter. Absolutely. Thank you very much. It was nice to see the send-off. We're going to talk about Ten Hag and Tuchel and the managerial situation and a few transfer stories in a moment. But let's just double down on this. So, yeah, I do think we need this big clear out. I do think that Bruno Fernandes has to be part of the team. I said it last night, and obviously you can say things after a game. It's almost like being a bit drunk, isn't it? You sober up the next day when you've had time to think. But I think what we saw with Bruno Fernandes is a better team without Rashford in it. And I'm not digging Rashford out here, but I think with Bruno, over the last few years, there has been this temptation to hit this Hollywood pass over the top because he knows he's got someone quick in the team. And last night he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it for 80 minutes. He couldn't hit a ball over the top because Garnacho's not really that, Ahmad's not really that, and McTominay's certainly not that. So we had to play more possession-based, and we were a much better team for it. So it just shows that Bruno, with different players around him, can play a different game. He's intelligent enough to do that. And Bruno is massively frustrating when he's hitting those long Hollywood balls and shooting from 40 yards. But last night he was more measured. And he can do that role. And I think that really does work for us. Which I suppose brings us back on to something that is quite topical. Andy says, Ahmad's superb performances signifies the end for Rashford, just not needed anymore, says Andy. Well, look, I was going to mention Rashford because of this video that went around last night. There is a genuine reason to talk about Marcus Rashford because we've got Garnacho, we've got Ahmad. We're hopefully going to sign Michael Elise. We have to sign a winger. Whether it's Elise or somebody else. So we've got Ahmad, Garnacho and a new winger coming in. It's harder and harder to see where Rashford does fit into this Manchester United side. And it's more and more logical to think that if there was an offer out there, would we not be all better off taking it? Whether it's Rashford, PSG, Man United, I think it's a match made in heaven for everybody. I really do. Look, seeing that clip last night made me sad. To see Rashford warming up and having to go and talk to a fan and he looked pissed off. I don't know what the fan said. Some people were saying he called him a dickhead. Some people were saying get out of the club. I don't know. You don't want to see that at a football ground. I never wanted Fellaini in a Man United shirt. He did get booed. I didn't like it. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it in the ground. I don't agree with it. Paul Pogba's had it. Anthony Martial has had it. So I don't agree with it. There is a flip side to that coin. There, of course, is a flip side to that coin. And I think you have to tread carefully here. But look, first of all, I just want to say it's hilarious that I got tagged in a few things this morning saying it's because of the United stand that people in the ground are having a go at him. Yeah, if I'm not taking the blame for somebody walking into Sainsbury's and stealing raspberries because I have them in a smoothie. Like, I'm not taking the blame as a community for some individual shouting abuse at somebody in the streets or in a football ground. Like, you've got to take accountability for your own actions. You're not a bloody lemming, and we're not the Pied Piper, and the media isn't either. And also, if everybody listens to what we say on the United stand, why was it when I stuck up for Rashford for the Belfast night out, you lot wanted to cancel me? Quite rightly, because I was wrong. So don't start telling me that online fans dictate somebody in the ground shouting abuse at somebody. Because we all know it's very easy on Twitter or Instagram to write, get out of my club. But we all know it takes a different type of person to walk up to somebody on the street or shout it to them. A very different type of person. So blaming it on online fans, I think there's a very distinct difference between writing an abusive email or tweet and shouting it at somebody on the street. And we all know that. So online fans, whatever that means, are not taking accountability for somebody that has it in them to shout it at somebody in real life, which they shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be doing that. There is a line and it shouldn't be crossed. However, what I would say is paying fan expressing an opinion towards a player that they don't think should be here anymore is the danger that Rashford's been walking all season. It shouldn't be happening in a ground, in my opinion. Some of you might agree with me. It shouldn't be happening. But paying fan at Old Trafford, expressing a disappointment at a player that's been bad all season, in some ways doesn't necessarily shock you, does it? I mean, I read a journalist this morning saying they couldn't believe that Old Trafford fans were giving Anthony Martial an applause at the end of the game. Does that mean that you expected him to be booed? And what's any difference to booing to somebody shouting something at Marcus Rashford? To me, it sometimes feels like the shoe fits certain players, but others. It's fine to boo and shout at Anthony. It's fine to boo and shout at Martial and Pogba. But if it happens to Marcus Rashford, for the same reasons, it's not acceptable. And the same reasons are clearly that he's just not playing very well. So this thing that Wayne Rooney has said about selling them all is based on standards and levels of where we need to be. And then the flip side of the coin is an underperforming player gets some unfair abuse at Old Trafford, and then you see people saying, we've got to back him. And I sort of get lost in the middle. He shouldn't be getting abuse on the street, in the ground. He shouldn't be getting that. But neither should Anthony Martial, neither should Bruno Fernandes, neither should David De Gea, and anybody else that's been given it. Nobody should be getting that in the ground because we're Manchester United and we shouldn't do that. Other clubs do it. Real Madrid regularly booed Casillas and Ronaldo. But at Man United, you don't want to see it happening. But on the one hand, we need to sell players that are not up to it. And then on the other hand, a player gets a bit of stick and we're like, let's back them. Let's support them. And I sort of get lost in the middle. So on the one hand, we need to sell these players to get to the level we need to get to. And on the other hand, one of these players gets some unfair abuse and we need to wrap him up and protect him because he's one of our own. And I'm like, I don't actually get that. So what are we doing then? Are we a charity or are we a football club? By all means, the abuse in the football ground of Man United players is not very nice to listen to. Whether it was Pogba being shouted, I mean, Pogba got it. Can remember that guy in the Stretford end? He was swearing and everything at Pogba. It was disgusting. Don't want to see it. Uncomfortable with it. You know, don't want to see it. But did Paul Pogba need to leave Man United? Yeah. And did everyone go, that abuse isn't right, let's keep Pogba, let's give him another contract? No, he needed to go. And he actually chose to go himself. Like, I think we need to be very careful about blurring the lines between sympathy and reality. Like, Marcus Rashford may well need to leave, like Rooney said. Because he's been shouted at by somebody in Old Trafford is not a reason to keep him. Because that should be called out for being unacceptable by people who think it's unacceptable. But it's not a reason to keep him because you feel sorry for him. Like, I felt sorry for him when I saw the clip. I actually think he'll be here next year and he'll have a big season. But he's had a bad season, and I'll still say, I think, for his own good, he should leave Man United. And I think it would be better for Man United, and I think it would be great for the club he goes to. I don't expect it to happen, and I'm more than happy for him to stay and start playing well. But if he doesn't, the pressure's always going to be there. The minute he stops playing well, he'll be back getting criticised again. The only way that Marcus Rashford is going to solve this is get himself into a space where he's happy and consistently playing well for Man United. Now, do you think he can do that? If he has a good season next season, brilliant. We'll be finishing very high up the league. But if he has a bad season the season after, we'll be back here again. And is that going to make him happy? Is it going to make the club happy? I think we've got to look like Rooney says, like many of you say, we've got to look long term. And the long term of Man United is very different to the last 5 years. And I think Rooney's right. I think I'm right. I think you're right. And we've been saying it a lot longer than Rooney. We need to clear this out. And you really need to look at every individual as a commodity, not as a person, not as a brand, and go, are they going to be part of a consistent journey to catch Man City over the next 3 or 4 years? And if it's a no, they've got to go at some point over the next 2. And that's how I would approach it. I'd take emotion out of it. I'd take social media clips out of it. I'd take, what's happened off the field out of it. I'd take everything out of it and I'd go, is this footballer, player A, good enough, consistent enough, and has the potential to be playing for this football club over the next 3 or 4 years to take us close to Man City? And if it's a no, you got to go. And I think that's what Rooney's saying. He looks at that team, and apart from the younger players, the only one he'd be keeping is Bruno Fernandes. United One says the obsession with Rashford is overboard and toxic now. I don't really know what that means, so we're not really talking about obsession or anything like that. The video was on social media last night and it's a news show. Mark, what do you say when Rashford hugged Højlund and it looks so fake, especially with the Luckhurst leaks potentially coming from Rashford, says Alex. I don't know anything about that. I didn't see it. He can't take the heat, so he takes it out on the fans. Not even the first time he's done this, says Julian. Atalex says, I'm a Nana. Mark, infrastructure needs improvement. And Ahmad's superb performance signifies the end for Rashford, just not needed anymore. I've read that one from Andy as well. Ray Carl Brown Amori, a legend of the chat, says, we can sell them without abusing them. Shouting at Rashford isn't great. You can back, and if he goes, say thank you. Exactly, Ray. I mean, I said when he came on last night, I'd love to, it was great that Rasmus scored. I'd love that cross from Rasmus to have found it to Rashford for a tap-in. That positivity, I think that what we saw last night was a step forward from where we've been in recent weeks. Look, I suppose the cold, harsh fact is I think we're a better team without Rashford in it at the moment. But I think we'll be a better team without Casemiro in it as well at the moment. So it's not individualisation. I think that if Martinez and Varane, or Martinez and Lindelof, or Martinez and Maguire were fit, that would be my centre-back pairing, and I wouldn't play Casemiro. I'd play Amrabat at the moment, and much the same as I'd play Ahmad over Rashford and keep Garnacho on the left. At the moment, Rashford and Casemiro are not in my best Man United 11. They're just not. Because the team feels better, structured, and, more focused without those players. So says that Casemiro played well last night. Yeah, but he was playing at centre-back, mate. I'm not keeping him at centre-back. He cost us a goal again. Casemiro is always going to potentially cost us a goal because he's not a centre-back. So when we get our centre-backs back, Casemiro can't play centre-back. So are you going to put Casemiro into the midfield and drop Amrabat at the moment? And if you are, that's fine. I'm saying, for me, our front six at the moment is Amrabat, Mainu, Bruno, Garnacho, Rasmus, Ahmed. That's the front six at the moment. That's our best front six at the moment. It can change based on form, but that's what I would be going with. Obviously, I want to see a strong back four as well. Let's move on. Anyway, very interesting from Wayne Rooney. Anyway, let's talk about Erik ten Hag. So, really interesting developments around the managerial situation at the moment. We did a poll at the end of the game yesterday. 88% of you want to keep Erik ten Hag. So I suppose the big question is, Keel says he'd send Rashford on loan. You can't loan Marcus Rashford, Keel. I mean, you got me thinking. It's a good point. You can't loan Marcus Rashford because his wage is too big and he's too high profile. If he goes off and starts scoring loads of goals, which he may well do, you've got to bring him back. So I don't think he's a loanable player. I really don't. Anyway, let's go back to the Ten Hag thing. Interesting point. So, look, for the last few weeks, it's been a constant media headline to push the managerial thing. Thank God it's dying. It's dying a death because we played better against Arsenal. We played even better last night. I will not have it that last night was expected. Newcastle are a good team fighting with Chelsea for that last Europa League spot. And for us to beat Newcastle 3-2 at home is a good result for us. And we played well in the limitations of what our expectations are with the team that we can put out at the moment. So it was a good result. It showed a togetherness, and there is a positivity around Ten Hag that he's probably not had for weeks. So there isn't really much sway for a Manchester Evening News or a Daily Mail or an Athletic to start writing about Gareth Southgate or Thomas Tuchel or anything at the moment. It just isn't. And we've got an FA Cup on the horizon, which is quite a nice thing to look forward to. So where are we with the managerial situation at the moment? And honestly, I get asked this a lot. Have you heard anything? Do you hear anything? The official line from those very close to the situation is that it's hard to tell what's going to happen. That's the official line, and it's been like that for a while. And whether you listen to Fabrizio or David Ornstein or people who you know in the club, it's very difficult to know. The sway is towards Ten Hag staying at the moment, but I wouldn't say that's set in stone by any means. I think the big issue that Ineos have got is financially they don't have a lot of money. The Dan Ashworth thing has ended up, and I can give you some news on Dan Ashworth, by the way. He will be our new director of football, but Ineos will not acknowledge it publicly, but they've been absolutely stunned by how this has played out. And maybe it's a learning curve into the world of football now, because they have made mistakes at Nice. They have. I think their current director of football wants to leave, actually. And they have made mistakes, and it's not always gone well. But the Dan Ashworth thing has really surprised them, because when they allowed it to hit the press in late January that we were going to get Dan Ashworth, they expected him to be our director of football by late February. That public announcement that we were getting Dan Ashworth at the end of January, and here we are in mid-May, is an absolute shit show. And they're stunned. Because what's happened is Newcastle have gone, hold on a minute, you've got a contract, and unless you give us 20 million quid, we're not going to break from the contract. And United's and Ineos's plan has just blown up in their face, because they're like, shit, we've announced to everyone we're getting Dan Ashworth, which is a really big positive, and now it's going to get locked up in legal technicalities. So they are learning along the way, and by no means are they not competent and determined, but they are being hamstrung by things that they didn't foresee. You would never have put it out there that you were after Dan Ashworth if you knew it was going to take 5 or 6 months. In fact, you might have gone for somebody else. But they have to go for Dan Ashworth now because it's been such a public, drawn-out thing. And they should do, because that's the person that they want. But what it has shown is that we don't have a lot of money. Because if we had loads of money, you'd just say, there's 15 million, let's negotiate. But they can't do that for Dan Ashworth. Now, we know to sack Ten Hag will cost about 10. We know to bring another manager in will cost money for the new manager, but it will also cost money because they'll want to spend more money than Ten Hag, because they'll want a bigger clear out, they want a bigger, they want to bring players in that they want to play that might not be the right sort of players. So there is a financial element to it. Also, the big issue is a little bit like Bayern Munich, a little bit like Barcelona. When Xavi was going to go, when Tuchel was going to go, you look into the market, Barcelona can't really see anything. I mean, Liverpool have ended up going with a manager from the Eredivisie. Wasn't their ideal choice to replace Jurgen Klopp. Bayern Munich have looked around. They can't really find anything either. So what happens is Barcelona speak to Xavi and Xavi stays. Bayern Munich are now speaking to Tuchel, like in-depth conversations to try and get him to stay. The manager market's not very good. It really isn't very good. And you put yourself in a position, whereas if Ineos sack Ten Hag and bring in whoever, and it doesn't work, what happened with Jose Mourinho? Everybody wanted Mourinho out at the end. And then what we learned over the next 2 years was that Mourinho was stabbed in the back by the players and the board. And the common consensus in this fan base now is that Mourinho shouldn't have been sacked. He may well, he wouldn't be Man United manager now because he's not the sort of manager that would be there 8 years. But he definitely shouldn't have been sacked when he was. He was betrayed by the players and the board who threw him under the bus. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Man United fans can look at a manager that's been sacked and go, we probably shouldn't have done that. Well, we're already thinking that before they even do it to Ten Hag. So this would be an absolute nightmare for Ineos if they decide against fan opinion to sack a manager, which is their right and they can do it, and then it goes to shit. I just think they have to stick with what they've got for this summer, which is going to be a very, very traumatic summer in relation to it might not go the way we want it to go, and go with some continuity into the next season. And I also think Sir Jim Radcliffe dropped a massive hint 2 months ago in that interview he did for the cycling podcast, where he was saying about Arteta and Arsenal and how he admired the ownership for showing some patience and vision. So look, I feel they're going to stick with Ten Hag. I do. I don't know whether it's going to be the right decision, but I think it's the right decision for now. Next season will be massive. I also think that we are Manchester United, and whilst we haven't got wingers at the moment that play the way Man United should be playing, what we have done really well this season is revolutionise what we do with the youth. realistically, our youth development over the last 20 years hasn't been what it should be. We've had Rashford, we've had Greenwood, but it's not been as sustainable and as consistent as it should have been. And I look at it now, and you've got Ahmad, who's been brought in as a young player, Rasmus, who's been brought in as a young player, Mainu, who's come through the youth exclusively, Garnacho, who is also classed as youth, although we did bring him in from abroad at a young age. There's an under-18s team that's rammed with talent. We've got such a vision for youth development at our team at the moment, and Ten Hag is a huge promoter of that. So I hope he's going to stay. I think he probably will. I don't think the FA Cup final should be built up to be, if he wins it, he stays, and if he loses it, he doesn't. I think that's way too narrow-minded to say that the FA Cup rescues him or saves him. I mean, let's just look at that for a moment. If we win the FA Cup, we'll keep him. If we lose the FA Cup, we'll sack him. That's a financial decision. So basically, you're saying, if we get into Europe and earn a bit of money in the Europa League, you can stay. But if you don't, you're sacked. It doesn't make any sense. Surely it's about, if we're in the Europa League next season, how does that make next season any better for you? I already know what I think about next season now. I would be giving him a contract now. I think it would be a boost to the team. I think it would hurry up those players who are thinking about going. I think it would hurry up transfer deals, because let's be honest, if you're Michael Elise or you're Tosin or you're Branthwaite, are you signing anything at the moment when you don't know who the manager's going to be? So I think we're at a point right now where Ineos should announce the new contract. It would be a huge boost for the FA Cup. It would be a huge boost for the team. It would push those people who are thinking of going out the door, and it would solidify the players that are thinking coming in to come. I don't see the delay anymore. If we're waiting to see what happens in the FA Cup final, I think it's narrow-minded. Because look at it like this. If we win the FA Cup final and you keep him, fine. If you lose the FA Cup final and you sack him, you're basically saying that you don't know whether you want to keep him based on whether we beat the best team in the world. Come on. How is Man City a decision to keep him or not? And whether we're in the Europa League, you could argue that if we're not in Europe next season, we'll be a better team than we are with it, because we're still a developing team and we can do more on the training ground. So I don't think the FA Cup final should be anything to do with it, to be honest with you. And I actually think that if we give him a new contract now, there's more chance of winning the FA Cup. We'll be able to get on with the transfer activity sooner, and players that are thinking of going will decide sooner. It was a sentimental match for most players, as they know half of them will be gone. They played for themselves, not the Ten Hag, not for the fans, says Alif. Valencia on the beat says, hey Mark, people don't understand how terrible our squad is. Would you make a list of our players that can play for City? Eric Ten Hag in. The only players that would be playing for Man City are probably Luke Shaw if he was fit. Martinez potentially, because of how he plays and how Pep plays. I think Bruno would be able to adapt. I don't think he would start. And I think Pep would be very interested in people like Mainu, Rasmus and Garnacho to develop, and maybe Ahmad as well. Dan Ashworth's garden must be looking amazing, says John. David Sherwin says, I love you, mate. Thanks for everything. Yeah, big up the community. Make sure you smash a like on the video. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'd love to hear from some of the Ten Hag outers still. You know, I mean, I think for me, this is a democracy. It's a community. It's about both sides. I've seen a lot of people saying that they agree with me that Rashford will have a good season next season wherever he is. I really do think that. But look, I've stated my case. I think they should be handing him a new contract now. I think it would be a massive win for Ineos to hand him a new contract now. A massive win. I'd do it before the FA Cup final. I think it'd be a huge win. You can focus on the transfer window. Players that are thinking of going will make their mind up. You can get ahead of the summer. Be a brilliant thing to do. But let's talk about if they did sack him. Where are we at? Because this is the big thing that Ten Hag out brigade has always had. Who's your manager? And more, we're stepping into that void that personally I don't like, which is, you know, shouty, screamy without accountability. And what I mean by that is, you can't just hypothetically sack a manager and not hypothetically bring one in, surely. You can, but it doesn't make any sense. My brain doesn't work like that. So when I was saying get Van Gaal out, it's because I wanted Mourinho to come in. When I said get Mourinho out, it's because I wanted to. I can't remember who I wanted. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I will have said somebody, but I can't remember who it was because it was so many years ago. When I said I wanted Ollie out, I was saying, well, what about Brendan Rodgers? What about Zinedine Zidane? They're available. Go and get them. I felt they were better. And obviously, when we were going to get rid of Rangnick, it was Ten Hag for me. So I won't say sack a manager unless I can think of somebody that can come in, because it might be worse. It might be worse. And I'm going to go back today and find out who I was saying to bring in instead of Mourinho, because I can't remember. I mean, it's a few years ago. So I think we are stuck in that position now where you've got the get the bold fraud out people. And they're, unfortunately, they're in a very sticky situation because they have been very abusive towards this manager. We've seen the tweets, we've seen the video clips. I don't think you can come back with your tail in between your legs now going, oh, actually, I've seen something and I quite like him. Hold on a minute. You've been abusive about him. You've been abusive about his hairline. You've called him a fraud. I don't think you can suddenly go, oh, I've seen something good there now. I think I'll get on side. I mean, this is the danger when you go in at that level, is that you pretty much got to stick with it, because otherwise people are just going to say, well, you're the fraud, because you can't say strong things like that and then change your mind. So to those people, the problem I think you've got is respect. You want to sack this manager. I don't respect the abusive words, but you probably got a reason why you want to sack him. Where are you going now? Because if Tuchel stays at Bayern Munich, and I don't want Tuchel anyway, if Tuchel stays at Bayern Munich, Nagelsmann's staying at Germany, De Zerbi's going to cost 20 million and he's not the right guy. I mean, they lost again last night. Where are you going? Are you really going Potter or Southgate or Frank? There's nothing left. There's nothing left. I mean, the only one I can think of is Hansi Flick, and we haven't been speaking to Hansi Flick. So, and what do you really know about Hansi Flick that is different to Ten Hag? So, I see people saying sack Ten Hag, but I think more and more they're those people who say sack the manager, but it's not up to me to find the new manager. And this has been the problem since all season. I think there is a movement to sack Ten Hag, but they don't want the accountability of giving us a name of who's going to replace him, because ultimately that's a strength of Ten Hag's. There isn't a lot out there. Patrick Lynch says, I'm Ten Hag in, but Ineos could sack him and say that the new manager will need fans and patience, especially if things go bad. Well, I dread that, Patrick. I really do dread that, because if you're going to bring in a manager for the next 5 years, we've already got a manager for the next 5 years. If we're going to need patience and bad results, we've already got that. We're already doing that. So, keeping Ten Hag and letting go of the players is the move right now that can differentiate Ineos from Glazers. Exactly. Yeah, Space Oddie, I think you've hit a good point here, and I'll phrase it without my opinion. I think when you look at what Rooney has said, we need a massive clear out and we should stick with Ten Hag. When you look at what Gary Neville has said, we should stick with Ten Hag. When you look at what Space Oddie is saying there, clear players out, keep Ten Hag. I think that Ineos need to take notice of this, because some of these people have played for Man United. Some of them have played the game. Some of them are lifelong Man United fans. There's a collective theory there now that the majority is, let's stick with what we've got and see what happens before we make a rash decision. And where Ineos are going here is, if they ignore that advice, as is their right, I've got to say, if Ineos decide to sack Ten Hag, that is up to them. But it will be based on Sir Jim Radcliffe, Sir David Brailsford, Blanc, Barada and Wilcox. What's your Man United knowledge there? What is it? Compared to the majority of the United fan base who watches week in, week out for years, and a collection of ex-players. It's a big thing to go against. And all they're going to have on their side is the get this bold fraud out of our club brigade. If I was Ineos, I think I know where I'd be edging towards the majority, because it's also a PR decision, isn't it? It is. And owners must do what they want to do. I'm not saying if you go against the fans, Ineos out, they've got every right to do what they want to do. But I don't think it's a smart move in your first few months to do what the Glazers did. Because there is this undercurrent, as we were talking with James's email yesterday, there is this undercurrent that some people suspect that the Ineos are just puppets for the Glazers. I don't. I think they really do want to do good. But things like this will prove it. Because the Glazers would sack Ten Hag. 100%. That's what they do. That's what they do. The different decision, the new decision, the exciting vision decision is to not do what the Glazers would do. The Glazers would sack Ten Hag and keep the players because it's cheaper. What we want to do is keep the manager and get rid of the players because that's the right thing to do. It's more difficult. It's probably going to be more expensive, but it's the right thing to do. And as I said last night as well, what are your opinions on this? I don't think this season is a good season. I don't think there's any hiding from the fact that this season has been shit. But the way I look at it is, I'm not saying for 1 minute that this season is acceptable. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that you couldn't look at the manager and sack him. 100%. Of course you could. Look at how many games we've lost. Look at how bad we've been at times. What I'm saying is, why should the blame be on the manager? I really think it's a collective. I genuinely think that you look at this and you go, all right, Ten Hag's to blame. The players are to blame. The fitness department is to blame. Injuries are to blame. Lack of January transfer window is to blame. Lack of a left back's to blame. The Glazers not selling the club until halfway through the season is to blame. Ineos is to blame because they've probably not done as much as they could have done in the first few months. I think it's a shit season where everybody's to blame and everybody should go, we need to do better. Instead of going, like we always do, let's pin it all on the manager. Players pin it on the manager. Recruitment pin it on the manager. Owners pin it on the manager. Let's have a fall guy. I think we acknowledge it's been shit and we share the blame and work together next season to see if we can work better. And if next season it goes wrong, then, decisions need to be made. But the blame philosophy needs to change. Keeping Ten Hag and letting go of the players is the move right now that can differentiate Ineos from the Glazers. Exactly. Thank you very much. Been watching you since we were looking at bringing Ten Hag in, and I've been watching you religiously. Watched the game last night. I think Ahmad was brill, says leave my Barcelona. I know the name. Thank you. Will the new players want to play under Ten Hag, says Alif. Of course they will. Of course they will. Give Eric Ten Hag some young players, no bad habits, and watch, says Parker. Well, this is where I wanted to go next. And I think a lot of you are intelligent enough to grasp this. Our young players play well. Mainu, Garnacho, Rasmus, Ahmad yesterday. They play well this season. They're the shining lights of the season. The football that Garnacho and Mainu have had to play, by the way. I mean, I saw somebody giving, it was Luckhurst, gave Garnacho a 5 and gave McTominay a 6. And that'll be because Garnacho liked the tweet or something like that. It's just a witch hunt, as we know. No acknowledgement of the fact that Garnacho has probably played more minutes than any of our attackers this season at 19. That every single game he wants to play, in difficult circumstances he plays. And he didn't play well last night, but no acknowledgement from anybody that, he's 19 and he's always available and he always wants to play and he's played with injuries and he plays for the badge and he plays for the fans. And yes, there is a lot for him to learn, but he puts the shirt on game in, game out, week in, week out. No acknowledgement of that at all. The amount of football that Garnacho and Mainu have played is incredible this season. And but there is a point here. The younger players get it. The younger players follow the instruction better. If we are patient with these younger players, they'll become experienced players and more younger players will come through with them. And in a very short period of time, probably 2 seasons, we'll have a team that plays more consistently week in, week out, game in, game out, which is the vision, which is what we've not had for 5 to 10 years. On Ahmad, I want to call a few people out on Ahmad because I was sort of scouting social media last night and I saw a few people sort of trying to make, and fair play to the replies because people wouldn't have it. But there was a few people who obviously, they've said Ten Hag out and they need to find an angle to be negative about Ten Hag. So it was like things like Ten Hag has got blood on his hands for not picking Ahmad sooner, right? Almost trying to make out that it's a reason to sack him and that you know, the season would have been top 4 if we'd been picking Ahmad. And I sort of go, why are we always looking for an angle to be negative? On a morning of positivity, why are we looking always for an angle to be negative? And let's just look at the facts with Ahmad, right? You've been amazing. You've always been, as a community, wanting him to play. I've always liked Ahmad, followed him when he was at Rangers, Sunderland. And at the start of the season, Ten Hag himself spoke about him on pre-season about what a big opportunity this was for Ahmad. He'd had a really good season at Sunderland. What a big opportunity it was for Ahmad, and there was a lot of excitement. And he got injured. And he was injured until basically January. So we've got to take it that Ten Hag wanted to use Ahmad, and then he got injured. We hit January. Ahmad starts coming back. That's when the demands for him to play started. And we're now in May, where he's starting his first real games for Man United. Erik Ten Hag said at the end of the game yesterday, he's had to be patient. He's had an injury that we've had to nurse him back from. You know, he's had a suspension, which probably prevented him getting in the team when he should have done as well. And Ten Hag himself said, look, he's had to be really patient and he's had to wait a long time, basically too long. And Ten Hag said that himself. For me, he probably should have been in the team sooner. Yeah. But the fact that he's in the team, I don't think we'll see him out the team much anymore anyway. And to be fair, a couple of weeks ago, he came on off the bench a couple of times and didn't really do much. So I think people moan for... What I'm trying to say is I think people moan for moaning's sake. As long as the destination is correct, then does it really matter about how quickly you get to that destination? The one thing we're going to have to be over the current period to the future is patient. We're not going to fight for the title in the next 2 or 3 years. Absolutely not. I think we'll do well to get 4th place next year. The important thing is that what Ten Hag said about Ahmad last summer and what a lot of you have been saying all season is actually now happening. That justification is there. He has to start the next game. And if he keeps playing like he is, then he has to start the next game and the next game and the next game. I always knew that Ten Hag was going to give Ahmad a chance. It has taken a bit long. He's acknowledged that himself. But it's a credit to the player that he hasn't thrown a transfer request in. He hasn't lost focus. And although he scored a really good goal last night, he nearly scored an even better one when he linked up with Mainu with those quick feet. And that's after 2 games. I mean, Amrabat is another one who's really interesting. He said after the game yesterday, that's not really me. That's not really me. I mean, that's only my 2nd game in 4 months. I'm better than that. I'll get more fitness and I'll get more match fitness. So if that's applicable to Amrabat, then it's definitely applicable to Ahmad. He'll get better and better with the more game time he gets. So look, I see the positives. As I said, for me at the moment, our best 11 doesn't have Rashford or Casemiro in it. And I would always put Rashford and Casemiro in it. I think Amrabat's got to play. And I think Ahmad's got to play as well. So I see the positives. I see the momentum, and I'd be very surprised if we don't see the continuation of that against Brighton on Sunday, because the FA Cup final is basically the next big game for Manchester United. And people are going to be playing for an FA Cup final place, aren't they? So I don't expect to see a drop-off at Brighton when normally I would have done. I expect to see Manchester United, really step up. Leave My Barcelona says Garnacho had a spell of being subbed on, and then his drive pushed him to be one of the most consistent attackers in our squad. Renewed contact issue insurance for better performing, says Abdullah. Do you think that infrastructure degradation is a reason for so many injuries, says Mark. And Sean from Ireland says, for what our plan is, young players, is Ten Hag not the perfect manager? We would be looking at him right now if we were replacing this manager. And his story says, for years we've longed for proper structure in football in addition to the manager. It's just in the infancy. Let's see it flow with this manager. Thank you very much. And if Ineos really want to show how well their structure works, it only makes sense to do it with the same manager with a new structure. It's a Space Oddie. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I also think there's a great point around Garnacho as well, obviously, in the sense that if you look at the development of Garnacho under Erik ten Hag, he didn't come straight into the team, and there was a demand for him to come straight into the team, and we didn't do it. What we did was is that Garnacho would play a little bit, score a goal, be on the bench, be a cameo player, and quite rightly, as the Super Chat said, he then sort of worked his way into the team in a more consistent way, and got hold of his opportunity and did really, really well. And I think for Manchester United and Ahmad, Ten Hag is just following the same blueprint, where he has had a few cameos, he has scored a few goals like Liverpool, and now that hunger and consistency is there to grab the opportunity. Ten Hag's always been really consistent about this as well, hasn't he? He's always been really consistent about this in saying that you'll get into this team if you're good enough, and that opportunity has opened up for itself. Look, I think he probably did stick by Rashford too long. I certainly think he stuck by Anthony too long, and I don't think it's been rewarded by Anthony or Rashford. Anthony's had a lot of opportunities and hasn't shown enough. Rashford's had a lot of opportunities, he hasn't shown anywhere near what he can do. So this can only be a good thing. As I said, I think Garnacho has to start the FA Cup final. Whether he's playing well or not, he's been absolutely incredible for us over the last few weeks and months in playing. And Ahmad's in possession of that shirt at the moment. It's as clear as that. Let me just see. Someone just said there's some breaking news coming out. Let me just check for you. We go. No, nothing amazing there. Do you think Ineos will hand him a new contract before the FA Cup final, Mark? No, I don't. I think they, which is part of my concern that they're going to get rid of him, because I don't really see the point in waiting now. I don't. I actually think, what are we waiting for? I mean, and this is why I say I'm a bit uncertain, because if you're waiting to sack him, then wait until after the FA Cup final. If you're going to keep him, I don't see why you wouldn't announce it now. And also, Ten Hag was asked after the game a couple of times about his future, and he said it's a long answer. Well, I'm staying is not a long answer. So, look, I'm not saying it's over yet. Sorry, I've got a video out on That's Football at the moment. It's just dropped about VAR being scrapped, which I've just been messaged about. Okay, I'm back at 2 o'clock with you today. I'm on the 2 o'clock show today, which is great. I will see you for that. Absolutely brilliant show this morning. Really enjoyed it. Really good conversations. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I've just pinned it, but it's on That's Football. I've just done a video on VAR being scrapped. Wolves have put an amazing statement out asking for the Premier League clubs voting for the VAR to be scrapped. I think this is really important that football fans get behind it. So please do go and watch the video and get involved in your comments there. It's on That's Football. It's pinned in the live chat now. I've heard a lot of people saying that we shouldn't scrap VAR. The technology's fine. It's the people who use it. I think this is a cop-out. I think this is an absolutely stupid thing to say. And I explain it in the video in the first minute. I don't think there's a problem with the technology, but it needs to be switched off. These people are not going to change, so switch it off. You can't say let's keep it because the technology works, but it's the people running it. It's 2 months until the next season starts. They're not going to solve anything in 2 months, so we're going to have the same problems. Every Premier League club should be listening to football fans and switching it off. And if Man United don't vote to switch it off, they're not listening to fans. And that's a bad look. And it's Ineos again, isn't it? Like, are football fans going to vote with the PGMOL and keep it? Are football clubs going to vote with the PGMOL and keep it? Or are they going to listen to football fans who are the victims in this? They've got to listen to fans. Be a bad look for any Premier League club to vote against their fans on this. But give the video a listen if you're not aware of everything. It's a really big story, and it's on That's Football now. Take care, everyone. I'll speak to you a bit later. Legends, and don't miss the podcast later. It's coming out about 5 o'clock on Spotify. Goldbridge has been blacklisted and banned by a Premier League club that's not Man United. It's a true story. It's on the podcast at 5 o'clock. I'm gutted. Speak to you in a bit.